I was never so thrilled as I was the day I stumbled upon Susan Cain's book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Thrilled, relieved, affirmed. Susan gave me permission to own who I was at my core. No longer did I need to declare sheepishly, apologetically, that I was an introvert. It turns out that the dearth of gregariousness in our culture was not always predominant or necessary. Perhaps I was born for another time. Or, there I go again, apologizing. Perhaps I was born for just such a time as this. Quiet talks about the development of the extrovert ideal and the rise of what it calls the mighty likable fellow. Cain takes us back to 1902, to the shift that occurred in the now renowned Dale Carnegie from worrisome farm boy to public speaker extraordinaire. Somewhere around that time, America had shifted from what cultural historian Warren Sussman identifies as the culture of character to the culture of personality. In the former, our ideal self is serious, disciplined, and honorable, with a focus on how one behaves in private. With the latter, we turn to a concern over how we are perceived, to a captivation with those who are bold and entertaining. As social roles began to change, we needed to change also. We became more performative in order to meet the demands of work and life that took us beyond the home and farm into our newfound industrialism. I took the informal quiz in the introduction the other day. I probably took it when I first read the book, although I didn't record my answers. In 14 out of 20 definite responses, there were a few that were kind of on the line and a few definitely no. But it showed that I am most certainly an introvert. And this was no surprise to me at this point in my life. I have consistently fallen on the introverted side of the Myers-Briggs inventory for most of my years, only recently inching my way over the line toward extroversion, likely a product of my work and its expectations. And while I find it mostly fascinating, I can hear a little negativity there in the tone as I describe my placement and my journey, as if I was previously lacking and now am acceptable. These days, I think of myself as an extroverted introvert. But the questions arise. Was I always like this? Was I born this way? Is it nature or is it nurture? According to Cain, it's a bit of both. She cites the work of developmental psychologist Jerome Kagan and his longitudinal study of some 500 children, beginning at the age of 4 months and following them into adulthood. He had been studying temperament for a long time, and in 1989, theorized that he could determine whether one would become an introvert or an extrovert based on a 45-minute evaluation. What he was testing for was reactivity. And the upshot of it is that those who were most reactive, animated, agitated, loud, when exposed to sights and sounds and movement, would become introverts later in life. This was counterintuitive, because you might think that the most animated would be the extroverts, their responses excited and full of pizzazz. But it turns out that those were the ones who were the most sensitive to the various exposures. And thus was born, more or less, the idea of the highly sensitive person, as something that we are hardwired for. Now, I am here to testify that nurture does play a role. I may have had a propensity towards introversion, but it was shaped by my existence as well. I was an imaginative sort as a child, tenacious, and not exactly what my parents might have expected from their little girl. I came of age in that era where the paradox of female identity was in full force. There was an expectation that I might be outgoing enough to attract a mate and settle down to the American dream, and at the same time be demure enough so as not to upset the gender norm. It was, after all, the early 60s. My shyness was affirmed in those years. Perhaps it was more that my extroverted tendencies were not. And it has been a lifetime resetting that balance. And like anyone else, I was aware of cultural expectations for folks entering the workforce, something that my parents hadn't likely planned for. That I would be that outgoing person, unafraid of the crowds or of speaking my mind. My shyness became less an asset and more a handicap. And as a sensitive person, I felt that, which, if we follow Kagan, tends to pull me closer in to myself. I related, when I read, of Susan Cain's story of her abject terror at the notion of public speaking. So fast forward to this spring and the publication of Dorcas Cheng Tozun's book, Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul, How to Change the World in Quiet Ways. The title jumped out at me. We heard Margaret read to us this morning from one of the opening chapters. There, she cites the many ways we can think about activism in our lives and in our world. These are the people who make a difference, we think. Now, I was an organizer in my 20s, but I played a support role, more behind the scenes. I marched, but I was not the one with the bullhorn. Cheng Tozun talks quite a bit about the highly sensitive person, finding in this personality type plenty of virtue. She says that the world has always had both warrior kings and priestly advisors. The warriors are out there, aggressive, prioritizing freedom, expansion, and fame, wanting more in the way of resources, land, people, and control. But they required the balance brought to the fore by the advisors, observers and listeners, thoughtful, compassionate, and creative. Without that balance, societies and cultures didn't last long. Sensitive people, she says, are intuitive and meticulous, understand people well, and can see both sides of issues. And unfortunately, they can be overlooked by Western culture with its propensity toward the warrior type. Social justice work is no different, a microcosm of the larger society. And I want to say today that this has implications for us as a justice-seeking faith community. Cheng Tozun talks about some different roles than those we think of as the true activists. Connectors utilize social capital, the bonding type and the bridging type. The first exists among those who share similar values and backgrounds, bonded by commonality. These can be healthy, but also insular and exclusive at times. So a word to the wise here. The second type arises out of relationships that move beyond typical demographics, characteristics and social groups, and take more effort to build and maintain. But they expand our knowledge, open up networks, and increase tolerance and acceptance. She uses the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964, organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Congress on Racial Equity, as an example. Building bridges. Creatives use the arts to effect change. The United Farm Workers El Teatro gave voice to the marginalized, raised money, and raised public awareness. Art changes us as it viscerally communicates the realities of human experience in ways that our senses can't ignore. Record keepers like William Still, who documented Underground Railroad arrivals at their last stop on the journey, serve to hold our collective memory, providing ways to examine our past. Authoritative records are key to ensuring that our contexts and histories are understood accurately and that we don't repeat mistakes. Cultural Studies professor Henry A. Giroux says that the organized forgetting we see happening in authoritarian governments seeks to control historical narratives. How much more valuable record keeping becomes in light of this. Builders, too, those who show up with engineering skills and empathic hearts both, are needed in these times to balance the disparities in technology across the globe. Technologies that empower need to be tailored to the specific needs of the populations they will serve. It is a both and we might not have put together before. Equippers are those who educate for leadership. Social movements are built on people who have been recipients of knowledge and training and opportunities for practice. Teaching and mentoring are often places where the highly sensitive thrive. And finally, researchers who dig into issues, ask questions, challenge assumptions, study, theorize, and experiment are a powerful force in the movement forward. Chang Tozan cites the work of psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Phipps Clark and their DOLLS test, which studied the development of self-esteem in young people and was influential in the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka case by documenting the devastating effects of racism on African Americans. It is the work of proving injustice. Deepa Iyer's 2017 Social Change Ecosystem Framework maps out possibilities for our social change roles, and they are in agreement with Dorcas Chang Tozan, or she with them. The map shows 10 different roles: weavers, experimenters, visionaries, storytellers, guides, healers, and caregivers among them. Only 2 categories, frontline responders and disruptors, are truly extroverted roles. What I take from this is the importance of clarifying our values and our roles so that we can be of the most support to the work of social justice. It takes all of us, all of our unique personality types, to form a social justice movement. We know this, but I've heard more recently some amount of lament that we are not on the front lines like we might have been in the past. Some of us never were, but for those of us who have had that experience and perhaps even thrived in the midst of that experience, our lessened ability to do so can be frustrating. We are nostalgic for the days when we were at the forefront of marches and organizing. Why haven't we taken to the streets? As I look around at us, I see people full of passion for justice work. And I see also a limited number of us here and on Zoom. And I see that we are aging, and we have only so much energy in any given day, so much physical strength and agility, so much capacity to hold all the pieces together. But what I don't see is a lost cause. With all the changes we are undertaking here, we need also to be thinking about how we view our role in the justice arena. It too needs to be right-sized. And we need to recognize that there is no shame in taking a behind-the-scenes role in the work. It is, in fact, a quite necessary role if Cheng Tozan is right. The introverts and extroverts depend on one another. Can we shift our focus, remaining aligned with our values, and make the differences we long for? So many of you are so very well connected in our communities and beyond. I think about our art shows downstairs and the messages they have brought this year, not to mention the ministry of the thrift shop in our community. How many of you have been teachers and mentors throughout your lifetimes? And the brilliant minds that sit before me, I am in awe most of the time. This week, I want to invite you into a shift in thinking about who you are, who we are together, how valuable our role can be in these times. If you are an introvert, find your comfortable niche, dig in and serve the whole. And if you are an extrovert with a little less energy than in the past, try on a few of these other roles and feel the satisfaction of continued participation in the things that you are passionate about. We need all of us to bring about the justice we seek. Blessed be, and amen.